In March 1989, a 21-year-old pre-med student from Texas crossed the Mexican border for spring break. He never came home. Mark Kilroy's disappearance triggered an international investigation that would uncover one of the most disturbing criminal operations on the US-Mexico border. What authorities found was not what they expected. This is a story about a missing student, a drug trafficking ring, and a violent distortion of religious practice that left at least 15 people dead. This is the story of Mark Kilroy. Mark James Kilroy was born and raised in Santa Fe, Texas, a small community southeast of Houston. By 1989, he was a junior at the University of Texas at Austin, studying pre-med. According to those who knew him, he was a good student with plans for medical school. In March 1989, Kilroy and three friends, Bill Huddleston, Bradley Moore, and Brent Martin, traveled to South Padre Island for spring break. This was a common ritual for college students at the time. South Padre Island sits at the southern tip of Texas, just miles from the Mexican border. The plan was simple: a week of relaxation before returning to school. On the night of March 13th, 1989, the four friends made a decision that thousands of spring breakers made every year. They crossed the border into Matamoros, Mexico, to visit the bars and clubs near the International Bridge. At the time, this was routine. The drinking age in Mexico was lower, and the bar scene in Matamoros was designed to attract American tourists. Mark Kilroy had no reason to think that that night would be different from any other. He was wrong. In the early hours of March 14, 1989, Mark Kilroy and his three friends were walking through the streets of Matamoros after a night of bar hopping. As the crowds thinned and the group moved through the streets near the border area, they became separated. According to later police reports and witness statements, Kilroy was standing on a side street near the main street when he was approached. Court records indicate that cult member Serafin Hernandez Garcia and at least one accomplice lured Kilroy toward a truck. Once he was close enough, they grabbed him and forced him into the vehicle. His friends initially assumed he had walked back toward the border on his own. When they couldn't find him at their hotel, they began searching the streets of Matamoros. Then, they contacted the US consulate and the police. Mark Kilroy had vanished. According to investigative reporting and trial testimony, Kilroy was driven from Matamoros through the back roads to a remote property known as Rancho Santa Elena. The ranch was owned by the Hernandez family, a family involved in drug smuggling operations across the border. Court records state that Kilroy was held in a vehicle overnight. A ranch worker later testified that he gave Kilroy food the following morning. Approximately 12 hours after his abduction, a man named Adolfo Constanzo arrived at the ranch. What happened next is documented in police reports, forensic evidence, and trial testimony. According to investigators, Constanzo had Kilroy's face bound with tape. He then led him to a remote area of the property. Mark Kilroy was killed with a machete blow to the back of the neck. This method is consistent with the injuries documented in the autopsy report, but the killing was not the end. According to statements from cult members and physical evidence recovered later, Kilroy's body was mutilated after death. Parts of his body, including portions of his brain and spine, were removed for what investigators determined were ritual purposes. Mark Kilroy was not the first victim at Rancho Santa Elena, and according to the evidence that would later be uncovered, he was not the last. As his family searched for answers, authorities on both sides of the border began to close in on the truth. For weeks, Mark Kilroy's family and friends searched for answers. The US consulate in Matamoros was contacted, and the FBI became involved. Pressure mounted on Mexican authorities to find the missing American students. Throughout late March and early April 1989, a joint US-Mexican investigative teams increased their efforts. Roadblocks were set up on routes leading out of Matamoros to intercept drug trafficking. On April 9, 1989, a vehicle approaching one of these checkpoints failed to stop. The driver was Serafin Hernandez Garcia, a member of the Hernandez family drug organization. When he attempted to run the roadblock, police became suspicious. They followed his vehicle to Rancho Santa Elena. The property was placed under observation, and shortly afterward, it was raided. What investigators found at Rancho Santa Elena would shock both countries. On April 11, 1989, at least one suspect in custody led police to multiple shallow graves on the property. According to official reports, investigators began exhuming bodies, and the remains of at least 15 individuals were recovered from the ranch, and one of them was Mark Kilroy. His body was identified through dental records and physical characteristics documented by the medical examiner. But the graves were not the only discovery. In a shed on the property, police found what they described as an nganga, a ritual cauldron used in certain Afro-Caribbean religious practices. Inside the nganga, investigators documented human remains, including a human brain, animal parts, sticks, and other items consistent with ritual use. The ranch also contained clear evidence of drug trafficking operations. These include marijuana storage, smuggling paraphernalia, and financial records linking the property to the Hernandez family's cross-border operations. What had begun as a missing person case had become something far more complex. Investigators were now dealing with a drug trafficking organization that had incorporated extreme ritual violence into its operations. To understand what happened at Rancho Santa Elena, it is necessary to understand the man who orchestrated it. Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo was born in Miami, Florida in 1962. He was of Cuban descent and spent part of his childhood in both the United States and Mexico. According to biographical accounts and investigative reporting, Constanzo was exposed to Afro-Caribbean religious practices, including Santeria and Palo Mayombe, from an early age. By the late 1980s, Constanzo had established himself in Mexico City as a spiritual consultant. He offered rituals and spiritual services to his clients. According to multiple sources, they include drug traffickers and corrupt police officers. He called himself a palero, which means a practitioner of Palo Mayombe. Palo Mayombe is a legitimate Afro-Caribbean religion with roots in Central African spiritual practices brought to Cuba through the slave trade. It involves the use of an nganga, which is a sacred vessel containing earth, sticks, and bones through which practitioners communicate with spirits. In traditional practice, the bones are often obtained from cemeteries with appropriate rituals and permissions. What Constanzo practiced was not traditional Palo Mayombe. It was a violent criminal distortion. According to trial testimony from cult members, Constanzo began demanding live human victims. He claimed that incorporating human sacrifice into the rituals would strengthen the nganga and provide supernatural protection for drug operations. He told his followers that the rituals would make them invincible to police, that their drug shipments would pass through checkpoints undetected, that they would be protected from law enforcement and rival traffickers. Court records indicate that by 1987 or 1988, Constanzo had formed a close relationship with the Hernandez family's smuggling organization. He became their spiritual advisor and their padrino, also known as Godfather, and he convinced them that his rituals were essential to their success. But the rituals required victims. According to testimony and investigative reporting, the group initially robbed graves to obtain human bones. This practice, although disturbing, has some historical precedent in certain forms of Palo Mayombe and related traditions, but Constanzo escalated it. Trial testimony from cult members indicates that he began ordering kidnappings and murders. According to statements given to police, victims were chosen for various reasons. Some were drug dealers or rivals. Some were police informants. And some were transient or individuals who investigators believe were seen as vulnerable and unlikely to be missed. And then there was Mark Kilroy. According to statements attributed to cult members in multiple investigative reports and true crime accounts, Constanzo specifically wanted an American victim. Some sources claim he wanted someone educated, someone with a powerful brain that would enhance the Nganga's strength. These claims come from interrogation summaries and media reports rather than direct trial scripts, so they should be understood as the explanation offered by cult members and not independently verified facts. What is documented is this. Mark Kilroy was abducted. He was taken to Rancho Santa Elena and he was killed, and his remains were mutilated for ritual purposes. At least 14 other victims suffered similar fates. Following the discovery at Rancho Santa Elena, Mexican authorities launched a massive manhunt. Adolfo Constanzo and several members of his inner circle had fled. Among those being sought was Sarah Aldrete, a woman often referred to in media reports as La Madrina, also known as the Godmother. Aldrete was a student at Texas Southmost College in Brownsville and had been romantically involved with Constanzo. According to trial testimony, she participated in the cult's activities and was present during at least some of the rituals. Constanzo and his closest followers fled to Mexico City, where they took refuge in an apartment. For weeks, they evaded capture. On May 6, 1989, Mexico City police received information about Constanzo's location. They surrounded an apartment building in the Cuauhtemoc neighborhood. What followed was a tense standoff. According to police reports and witness accounts, Constanzo realized he was trapped. Rather than surrender, he made a final decision. Trial records and investigative reporting indicate that Constanzo ordered one of his followers, a man named Alvaro de Leon Valdez, to shoot him. Constanzo and other cult member Martin Quintana were killed in a closet by automatic weapon fire. When police entered the apartment, They found the bodies. They also found Sarah Aldrete, as well as several other cult members, alive. All were arrested. In the years that followed, Mexican courts prosecuted multiple members of the cult. The charges included murder, criminal association, drug trafficking, and related offenses. Sarah Aldrete was convicted of multiple murders and sentenced to more than 60 years in prison. This was the maximum effective sentence available under Mexican law at the time. Elio Hernandez and Serafin Hernandez Garcia, who were members of the Hernandez family drug organization, received similar sentences. Alvaro de Leon Valdez, who killed Constanzo and Quintana during the Mexico City siege, was convicted and sentenced to approximately 30 years, reflecting both his crimes and his cooperation with authorities. In total, around 14 individuals connected to Constanzo and the Hernandez organization were charged. Not all were tried for every murder, but multiple convictions were secured. Adolfo Constanzo never stood trial. He died in that Mexico City apartment in May 1989. Sarah Aldrete remains incarcerated in Mexico. US authorities have publicly stated that if she is ever released or extradited, they intend to pursue charges related to Mark Kilroy's murder in the United States. The Mark Kilroy case generated intense media coverage on both sides of the border, and with that coverage came distortion. Much of the contemporary reports labeled the group as narco-satanistas, also known as narco-satanists. The phrase appeared in both Mexican and American media, often accompanied by sensational language about black magic, voodoo, and devil worship. But the evidence does not support the claim that this was a satanic cult. What Constanzo practiced was a criminally distorted version of Palo Mayombe, an Afro-Caribbean religion with legitimate historical and spiritual roots. Academic analysis of the media coverage has argued that the US and Mexican journalists exaggerated the black magic elements, often relying on stereotypes and sensational framing. A master's thesis that reviewed the press coverage of the case concluded that the narco-satanist label reflected broader stereotypes about Mexican religiosity and violence rather than accurate reporting. Another common exaggeration involves the number of victims. Some media accounts and true crime retellings claim that Constanzo's cult killed dozens or even hundreds of people. The physical evidence does not support this. Approximately 15 bodies were recovered from Rancho Santa Elena. While other killings are suspected, particularly in Mexico City, they have not all been confirmed with recovered remains or convictions. There are also claims about specific spells or beliefs. For example, some sources state that cult members believed that they were literally bulletproof. What is documented in trial testimony is that they believed the rituals would provide protection from law enforcement and bad luck. Whether they believed in literal physical invincibility is less clear and appears to vary depending on the source. Similarly, highly detailed torture narratives describing hours-long sequences of specific acts are common in secondary sources, podcasts, and true crime books. The core evidentiary facts are more restrained. Mark Kilroy was abducted. He was held at the ranch. He was killed with a machete blow to the neck. His body was mutilated after death for ritual purposes. The rest is often embroidery, added by writers seeking to dramatize an already disturbing case. What remains true and what is supported by evidence is this. A group of people involved in drug trafficking incorporated extreme violence and ritual killing into their operations. They killed at least 15 people. And one of those people was a 21-year-old college student from Texas who made the mistake of crossing the border on the wrong night. The discovery of Mark Kilroy's body and the exposure of the cult's activities had immediate consequences. Spring break culture along the Texas-Mexico border changed. American students became more cautious about crossing into Mexican border towns. Mexican authorities faced increased scrutiny over corruption and their ability to protect tourists. For Mark Kilroy's family, the aftermath was one of grief and advocacy. According to news reports and anniversary coverage, they have worked to keep his memory alive and to raise awareness about the dangers that took his life. The case also had a lasting impact on how Afro-Caribbean religions were perceived in the United States and Mexico. Palo Mayombe, Santeria, and related practices faced increased stigma and suspicion. Despite the fact that what Constanzo practiced was a violent aberration, this does not represent how these traditions are practiced by millions of people. Academic scholars and religious practitioners have pointed out that conflating Constanzo's crimes with legitimate religious practice is both inaccurate and harmful. It perpetuates stereotypes and obscures the real dynamics of the case, which was a drug trafficking operation that used distorted ritual justifications for extreme violence. Over the years, the case has been the subject of books, documentaries, podcasts, and academic studies. It has become a fixture of true crime culture, often sensationalized, often misrepresented. But at the center of the case is a simple, tragic fact. Mark Kilroy went on spring break. He never came home. On March 14, 1989, Mark James Kilroy was abducted from a street in Matamoros, Mexico. He was 21 years old. He was studying to become a doctor. He had his whole life ahead of him. He was taken to a remote ranch and he was killed. His body was mutilated in service of a belief system twisted beyond recognition by a man who claimed spiritual authority but practiced only violence. 14 other people died at that ranch. Their names are less well known, but they were victims too. The people responsible were caught. Some were convicted and imprisoned. One died in a shootout rather than face justice. But no legal outcome can undo what happened. No sentence can bring Mark Kilroy back. What remains is memory and the responsibility to tell the story truthfully, not as a sensational tale of black magic and devil worship, not as a morality play about the dangers of Mexico, but as what it was: a crime, a tragedy, and a reminder that evil does not require supernatural explanations. Mark Kilroy was a real person. He deserves to be remembered as more than a victim in a true crime story. This is his story, and the story of what happened when he crossed a border on a spring night in 1989. Our thoughts are with the Kilroy family and all those affected by this case. Please like, share, and subscribe. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And remember, these are real stories about real people. Thank you for watching.